Red Rising. This is a game published by Stonemaier Games. It is based on an intellectual property about which I know absolutely nothing. I know about it from the game. I learned of the existence of the Red Rising world from the game. When I saw images of the game online, I became curious about it. So in this video, you're going to learn the perspective of somebody who is not a fan. Again, nothing against it, just don't know it. And so maybe you also don't know much and you want to know if you can still be engaged with the game, if you can play with non-fans. So this is my perspective here. Red Rising is set in a sci-fi world of intrigue and manipulation. You're gonna control characters to trigger certain effects and to try to score points in different categories. So the game revolves around this pretty thick deck of characters. Each is worth a number of victory points at the end of the game. They may have an ability to this trigger when you play the card on the board, and then at the bottom you have different conditions that may generate or lose you victory points at the end of the game. And usually it is these are the extra points are going to be scored if the card at the end of the game is in your hand together with other cards or not together with other cards, if there are different conditions that apply, and so on and so forth. So standard victory point, special action, possible end game actions or other points, and plus the color. Each character belongs to a specific color, and there are a lot of effects based on that. The board has 4 areas: Jupiter, Mars, Luna, the Institute. When we set up the game, we place 2 cards there in each location. Each player receives a hand of 5 cards, and then we have a track representing the fleet track. The more you move your starship there, the more points you score at the end of the game. The Institute, where we place influence points. And then yes, each player has a specific house or clan, comes with a tile that also tells you the unique power that you have. You get influence tokens, a player aid, and then we have here a tray of helium, which is one of the currencies in the game, and that box is called the Institute. These are the basics. Actually, one disclaimer. When I saw that the game has like a 4-page rule book, 4, 6, something like that, very short, I thought I was gonna play this game with my daughters. They are the people I play game with these days in times of pandemic. That turns out to be not the case, because the game, although the general rules are very simple, the huge number of unique effects that you have make this game one that really is to be played with adults. An 8-year-old can play the game, but it takes somebody considerably older to play it well, to know what the heck they're doing, and to implement any strategy that makes sense. So ultimately I played the game Solitaire, and the game comes with an automa. So it can be played bona fide solitaire by yourself, playing against the game system. So this is what I'm gonna tell you about in this video. I'm gonna give you a general introduction to the game in case you don't know it, and you're gonna try to get a sense, hopefully, whether you're gonna enjoy it to play against other humans. But then I'm gonna tell you about the automa, which is how I played the game, and then I'm gonna base my conclusions and give you my assessment on the Solitaire version. And these days, you know, again, this is a game mainly geared towards adults. Many of us are pretty busy, and so having the Solitaire option may be attractive. So does the game play well as a Solitaire against the automa? We'll see. Generally speaking, the general idea is that during your turn, you must take 1 or 2 actions, and one of them is by far the most common. It's called the lead action. And then you have another action called the scout, which is a lot rarer. As the leader, when you take the action of leading, you take a card from your hand, you place it in any of the 4 locations, and you place it on top. When you place a card, there may be an effect here that you implement. For example, if I deploy this one on the Institute, I advance 1 space on the fleet track. That sounds to make it interesting there, and so I'm simply moving 1 space on that fleet track that will give me points at the end of the game. After I deploy a card in a location, I can then choose one of the other 3 locations, pick up the card on top of the stack in that location, add it to my hand, and then also gain the advantage of the location that I just took the card from. And so, for example, if I take a card from there, I get that advantage, which is to advance by 1 space on that track. If I take that card and the corresponding advantage, I gain a helium. If I take it here, I gain the sovereign token. If I don't have it yet, I physically take it. If I have it, it stays there, but there usually is an advantage that you can activate when you gain the sovereign token, even if you already have it. For example, here I place an influence on the Institute, which is also the advantage that you gain when you take a card from there and you activate that ability. You take one of your cubes and you place it there. As you can imagine, other players will also do that, and having the more influence than other people is good. This is really 90% of what you do in the game during your turn. Play a card, activate the deploy effect, choose another card to get into your hand, and trigger that effect. The lead action that I mentioned, you can also do it differently. You still play the card, you still activate the deploy effect, but then instead of getting a card that's from here, maybe you don't like it so much, you don't like what's there, you can draw a random one and you roll a die to get a random benefit from it. This is for that action. And so as you do this, you're playing cards and getting cards, which means you're manipulating your hand, which is really important. At the end of the game, you want to have a hand without the points here, plus a hand that will give you all of these other sweet effects. For example, this gives me 24 extra points if it's only my hand with gold, grays, and or obsidians. So during the game, I'm gonna manipulate things. I don't think I want the silver, but I wouldn't mind getting me another silver. If I take that one, then I also get an advantage, and so on and so forth. So manipulating your hand is very important, which means there may be a point where you're happy with your hand, you don't want to mess it up so much. So instead of taking the standard action, play a card, get a card, you do the other action, the other option, which is you take a card from the deck, you place it in any location, and you trigger the corresponding bonus. So those are really the two actions in the game, but then you have, again, this plethora of effects here, which makes the game a lot more challenging. You continue like this until 3 conditions have been met by any player, by any number of players. I meet one condition, you meet another one, third player meets another one, the game is over. Or any 2 of these 3 conditions have been met by the same player, whichever it is, that triggers the end of the game. The conditions are somebody has 7 helium, or somebody has reached spot 7 on that track, or somebody has 7 influence in the Institute. So whatever applies, then that triggers the end of the game, and you score points. You score points from the hand of cards that you have, points on top, end of game effects and points, points from the fleet, points from the Institute, which means the player who has the most cubes on the Institute gets to score 4 points for each cube there. Second player 2, and third player 1 point for each cube in the Institute. If you have the sovereign token at the end of the game, that's 10 victory points. Helium is 3 victory points. So there is a little bit to count. If you have cards over 7, then you have a penalty. So you gotta have efficient cards, not necessarily a ton of cards. So you collect points from all sources, which is not nearly as fiddly and laborious as it may sound here. Highest score wins the game. This is if you play against other humans. If you are playing against the automa, you have to do a couple of extra steps when you set up the game, but the automa is very smooth, as you will see. These 4 cards, you shuffle them and you place them randomly at the beginning of the game in each location. So this location is not just Jupiter anymore, it is also B, this one is also C, this one is also A, and this one is also D, which in another game may be different. They may be labeled differently. This card here is added to Luna, and there's a procedure that decides which side is going to be peeking out. and simply means that now the automa, when acting in that location, will also get that extra bonus. In this game, it would be helium. In this other game, it would be extra steps on the fleet. So there may be different advantages from game to game. Also, I look at the cards, at the value, at the top value here, the core value of the cards, and I determine if most of them are odd or even. I'm not gonna give the calculation now. I'm gonna, at a glance, assume that they're mainly even, and probably they're not. Doesn't matter. But whether even or odd during setup, I put that card peeking out there. It will be used only during scoring. And then I shuffle this deck of automa cards. When it's my turn, I'm taking my turn as normal. I take my actions, most likely I'm gonna play a card, deploy a card, trigger the effect, pick up a card. And that's gonna be, in most cases, what I do. And then, of course, collect bonuses, use bonuses, move my ship, add influence, that sort of stuff. But you wanna know what the automa does. This is what happens. The automa will draw 2 cards per turn, and you resolve them in order. When you draw a card, first the automa will deploy a card in a location. The location indicated there. It may be indicated by a letter or by the symbol. For example, in this case, the automa deploys a card in B, and then after deploying a card, picks up a card, and this time picks it up from that location there. And you form their hand, which soon will be more like a stack than a hand. Also, if there's a star here, that means that the automa gains the location of the corresponding place. So the automa gets the sovereign token, and the automa takes a helium, because that's the bonus that we see there. You see that arrow, because suppose that the automa is trying to pick up a card from a location that doesn't have any card there, then you look at the arrow and you move in that direction until the automa can pick up a card. So this would be in this case. If the automa is looking at an empty location, the arrow is facing the other way, then you move in that direction until you find a card that the automa can pick up. It's this simple. Now the automa, for example, is deploying a card in C, picking up a card from that location, which happens to be the same one in this game. In another game, may not be. And also activates and gains the advantage of that location, which is they would take some helium this time. And so pretty much, functionally, is the same effect that I would see on the board if someone else was doing stuff, which is I take my turn, and by the time my turn comes around again, some cards will have been added, some cards have been taken, and I got to deal with the new tableau. It may happen that the tableau doesn't change so much if the automa puts on a card and picks it up immediately, which may happen because of the combination of the symbols. Sometimes the automa does not trigger the effect at the bottom. Sometimes the bonus effect. Sometimes the automa, after deploying a card and picking up a card, banishes a card, so that is removed from the game. Or is it? It goes in a pile that's called the banish pile, and there may be effects that allow you then to manipulate that, to score cards in the banish pile, to pick up cards from the banish pile. Again, the idea is that around such a core set of rules, pretty much put on a card, pick up a card, get the bonus. Around that simple idea, there are just so many unique effects. But that's the general idea. You play your turn, the AI messes the board for you, collects cards, advances on this track, puts on influence, hoards helium, and you continue until the end of the game pretty much as normal. At the point you score points, this will be used because the cards that are indicated here at the end of the game, which is the ones with the matching number, so even cards in this case, score more for the AI. The ones that don't match, odd would be not matched in this case, score less. Plus there is a starting number of points that the AI just collects for showing up. So they collect a lot of points from a lot of sources. And at the end, you count points and you lose. Most likely you lose against the automa. At least that's what has happened to me fairly consistently. But technically, you check to see if you won or if you lost. which is likely because the automa is really good. I definitely like what I saw in Red Rising so far. I can't wait until the pandemic is over so I can play with my adult friends, because in essence it's a very simple game, and in actuality is a pretty complex game. So easy to play, so very hard to master because of the ginormous amount of game effects that come into play. They can be activated by the cards, by the interaction of the cards, the coming and going, the manipulation of the board. Heck, even the pile of banished cards matters because there's stuff you can do with that. I like that because it doesn't feel overwhelming, precisely because the general idea is so simple that then you can really spend a lot of your brain power that is unencumbered by the basic mechanics. You can spend it to try to figure out, if I get a red, I can connect it with this brown, and I don't break that other rule that says I shouldn't only have these cards, and I can pick up that card and do this and do that. So there's definitely fun in doing that. My only worry may be when I play it against other human beings, analysis paralysis, possibly, because the game incentivizes you to come up with some really crazy, complicated plans so that every card in your hand interact with something else in the hand or somewhere else, and therefore then maximizes your score. So I may worry a little bit when I play against other human beings, especially if it's with 3-4 players. What if they take too long? What if I'm the one who takes too long? Because also, since the board changes a lot between turns, you can't really plan ahead, which in a sense is great fun, because then when your turn comes, oh, you had this interesting challenge. But again, I wonder if because of that, then players are going to take a little too long. But know your players, know yourself, and I think you're going to be fine. For this reason also, well, if you find yourself having that problem, you got the automa, which is where I can talk more in detail, instead of just wild guesses. I think it's going to be great with other humans. With the automa, the game is fun. Honestly, I think if you don't think your friends are going to be interested in this game, but you're curious about it and what you saw seems enjoyable, I think you could play this game just as Solitaire. I think it's a legit game to just buy if you just want to play it in Solitaire. I think it works very well as a Solitaire game. Because the automa is so simple and so challenging. One problem that I have sometimes with Solitaire games with a true Solitaire option, not multiplayer solo, play both sides, best of your possibilities, but I take I make my moves, and then I execute the moves of the automa. Sometimes those are very cumbersome and complicated, and it takes so long. I do all these things for the automa, and then I make my move, and then the automa, and then I make my move. And I don't like that. It's just too much work. But this automa is so simple, so intuitive. Play a card, discard a card. 90% that's what the automa is going to do. And yes, after you discard a card, you add a cube here, or you move something there. Sometimes you don't do that. It's add a card, discard a card. Add a card, oh, it's the same card, gets discarded. That quick, that simple, that intuitive, and that is to me how automas should be in game. And that's not always possible with other kind of games, but with this one it really does. So I'm very happy with Red Rising, and I enjoy playing it Solitaire. It's the only way I played it, and I found myself playing over and over again because I wanted to win, and I couldn't because the way the automa scores, darn, that's just brutal. If you find yourself frustrated with that, of course, then there are very easy ways of tweaking that. Simply, for example, you lower the basic score that the automa just scores for showing up, or you increase it. There are ways of tweaking the difficulty, the challenge of the automa described in the rulebook, so you will not have any problem. Production is very nice. The board, the components, the cards impressive, that thick deck of cards, each character with his or her own unique art. Very nice. So nice production, but most importantly, very nice intuitive gameplay. You're gonna start playing in no time because the basic idea is so simple, and yet then I think you're gonna find yourself discovering and figuring out synergies for a very long time. I think the replay value is massive because you're not gonna go through the deck And you're not going to become familiar with the entire deck anytime soon, and even if you are, you're not going to probably use every card in every game. So Red Rising, very impressive, and I recommend it even if you're just planning to play Solitaire, because even just as a Solitaire game, it's a very solid one.